Hello, and welcome to our final installment of the Embodied Path to Better Inclusivity with Yin Shun and Ellie Rocher. And this is part of the programming of Collegeville Institute's Communities of Calling initiative. So, welcome, Yin Shun and Ellie, and we can't wait to see what you will do with us today.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to invite us to start how we have been starting, which is with the one word check-in. And I'm going to actually ask us to come off of mute this time since we're an intimate little group. And then folks watching the recording, I would ask you just to do the exercise with us. So take any movement that you want on your way to stillness. So that might be a shoulder roll or two. It might be a slow neck roll. You can sway, you can wiggle, but just recognize that you have a body. Notice how your body is feeling. And there's really, really no rush here. Oof. Zoom can be pretty hard on our bodies and we kind of don't even realize it all of the time. Whenever you're ready, move towards stillness. If you're seated, stack your shoulders up over your hips, distribute your weight on your two sitting bones, and I'll invite you to blink your eyes shut or take a soft gaze at the floor or desk in front of you. On your next inhale, reach the crown of your head up toward the ceiling. And on your next exhale, gently ground down through your sitting bones and through the soles of your feet. Allow your chair to do its job to hold you up and support you. Notice that you're breathing. And then allow your breath to take you deeper inside of your body. Turn toward your body with curiosity and notice how it's feeling. Notice parts of your body that may be calling your attention. We are never just one thing, but I'll invite you to attach a word to how your body is feeling at this particular moment. What is taking up a little bit more space or bubbling up to the surface? What kind of energy are you bringing with you into this shared community today? On your next inhale, fill your lungs up more than usual. Exhale really slowly. And when you reach the bottom of your exhale, blink your eyes back open and come back to our shared space. Okay, thank you. I'll begin. I'm feeling grounded right now. Jane, how about you?
Well, I have a kind of scatteredness that's moving toward being gathered.
Love that. Love that. Kelly, how are you feeling?
Like anticipatory or
Yeah,
a lot of anticipation.
great word. Thank you. Amy.
Part of the game was empty, but in like a ready to receive way. So anticipatory might, maybe I'll piggyback off of you a little, Kelly.
I like that. That's good. Yishan, how you feeling?
Joyful.
Wonderful. Good. Okay, take that. Take it. I'm passing the mic. Let's see what you got for us today.
Right. Wonderful. I am going to go ahead and share my screen with you all. Okay. Can you see this?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Terrific. So I'm going to ask you all, were you able to have a look at the exercises that I gave people, the homework I gave folks? Okay. All right. So we're gonna actually start there. See if I can figure out how to do this. Boop, boop. Okay, so I wondered if you had a chance to do this, like walking around your home and community and asking yourself, how would somebody who's disabled or differently disabled experience your space? Were you able to have a look at that and discuss that with yourself? Yeah. Okay, what did that bring up for you, if anything?
Well,
Jane.
A very close friend of mine whom I traveled with uses a wheelchair, and my mom used a wheelchair, and I am just very aware that like it just wouldn't work at all. Not in my neighborhood, not in my home, because the terrain is very, you know, up and down, and there's been nothing done to make that different. And I heard someone say recently, you know, like if we thought about the world differently, like we would never have put in all these stairs. Like we would have had it different ways. Like that really disability depends on how the environment has been shaped for people. And
yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. How about anybody else? As you were walking around your home and community, did you sort of encounter things that would have been a barrier for you if you were disabled in some way?
I can share. This is something I think about a lot, actually. I am someone who's disabled, and so I think, but currently, so sometimes I have periods of needing more like mobility aids or having mobility issues, but currently don't have those needs. And so I think it's an interesting balance of trying to find like the house that I currently rent. I would say is not very disability friendly, but it's what I could afford, and it has enough of what I needed for current stance. But like, I think even something as like at my age, I never would have before this diagnosis thought about having a bathroom on the main level, or having a walk-in shower instead of a tub shower. Or not having a bedroom upstairs. So I think those are all things, like some of those things I have access to and some I don't. So I think this question brought up a lot for me of like being grateful for my current state of being, but also knowing that that could change. And then someone who has more needs than me right now would not be able to navigate that.
Yeah, Jane and Kelly, you both are hitting upon something that one of the tenets of universal design, or of inclusive design rather, is the standards that we look at, is that it's not the environment, it's not us that is disabled, it's the environment which makes us disabled, right? At the end of the day, that's kind of what it comes down to, right? And Jane, you phrased it really well, right? I mean, this idea of making sure that we are in a situation to appreciate what it is that might happen if we were confronted with, you know, with another design challenge, right? For me, I always look at, for instance, the fact that I've stored certain things that I need way out of my reach. I always need a step stool. Why? Why is that? It doesn't make any sense, you know, right? Okay. Or people in my home, like my parents are older now, right? Or actually the other month I had this thing go wrong with my back, and I suddenly realized that skinny jeans were not designed for me because I could not get my feet into them at all, right? Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think these are just things that we pay attention to, or that we should be paying attention to. How about your calendars and your social media feeds? Did anybody take a walk through their social media feeds and calendars, and what did you discover there? I always notice that I am probably following fewer of the people I want to know about than I should be. I have a really big area of ignorance, for instance, when it comes to Alaskan Inuit folks. And I would like to know more about the First Nations of that demographic, right? So why aren't I using the power of the internet to find out more about them, right? I would like to know more about people who have chronic disabilities, right? Or who have chronic diseases. Why am I not spending more time on social media and following them as opposed to raging over what Elon Musk is doing? Why is that, right? And then my calendar is kind of a similar thing, right? That was a hard thing for me to confront, making sure for me that I was paying attention to folks who I wanted to get to know more about, or people in my demographic who just aren't as dominant. They don't show up as much, right? I have a lot of Southeast Asian acquaintances, but I don't make as much time for them in my calendar as I do for white women, for instance. Okay. So that's kind of the thing that I look at. Did anything like that pop out for you all? Yeah, Amy.
Yeah, in the reviewing my calendar bit, I think that I often will just have at the end of the day, like an hour or two that I'm like, I can spend that on other people. But usually it just made me think about like, oh, selfish with your time, Amy, of like, you know, maybe I'll set aside any time to do cleaning and chores and wonder, well, who's reaching out to Amy, instead of like, oh, no, I actually have an hour or two a day that I could be reaching out to a friend who I know would love to have someone ask them out to dinner because they haven't really had a nice longer dinner with someone this past week. I had an experience earlier this week of just like making dinner plans with a friend where we had no end time and both of us just were given that gift of time to just talk about whatever came up, and we weren't, you know, not feeling like we were burdening the other person with our company at all. And I was like, what a gift. And I am very selective who I give that to, but I could be a little more generous with my own time. So.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so can we talk a little bit about that selectivity? Like, what do you find that the selectivity has parameters around it? I mean, who do you find yourself giving that selective time to?
I mean, this is something I'm working on myself of like, so I think that I find I get pulled into codependent relationships or people wanting more and more of my time. And instead of me giving a bounded but short amount of time to a person, I'll just not give any of my time. And so I do give my time over to people where it's a little more mutual, where we can lean on each other and I'm not always having to step into the role of being the strong one, the like the one who has it together, the listener. And so, yeah, I'm trying to find that balance between like appropriately bounding my own needs as someone who can be highly empathetic and what people want from me. But I find that I will gravitate toward other people that have proven that I can lean on them as much as they can lean on me.
Yeah, and I think that that's a natural thing, right? I mean, our brains do this because we intake something like 11 million pieces of information a day. And if we didn't bucket sort, then we would go bananas, right? So this is one of those things that it's good at the very beginning to be aware of it, right? You need to start with awareness and then we can move on to accountability after that, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Moment. So with my calendar, what I was reflecting on is like grind culture, speed, efficiency. Like I see this as like whiteness in action. Even like efficiency, productivity. And so on Monday, I had an hour between my last work meeting and having to pick my children up from school. And I had this like frantic thing of like, I need to make this hour count. It has to matter. So it's like, if I'm going to rest, I have to rest really hard and make it count. And if I move, I have to move really hard and burn calories and make it count. And it just, it took me a while to feel into my body and choose this middle way where I just took a meandering walk and it didn't count. I didn't get any gold stars. I didn't further any of my relationships. I didn't, I just was a creature out in nature being. And that drive inside of me, there's a lot of factors, but I know whiteness is one of them. That one of the signs of toxic whiteness is speed, and efficiency and productivity. And I just buy into that full on, and you can see it in my calendar where like it's so odd for me to have an hour that I have to like maximize getting all of my needs met. And I want a gold star for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. I think it's interesting. We're going to get into this a little bit later on, Ellie, but I want to pick up on something you said about toxic whiteness, right? That is a thing, definitely. I would also argue that those of us who are East Asian kind of fall into that category, right? Whether it's because of assimilation, right? Or because we were taught that you got to outsmart everybody else in very specific categories, by the way. It's okay for you to know to like not know how to talk to somebody, but it's not okay if you don't know how to math your way to the end of a problem, right? Or logic your way to the end of a problem. But there is a sense of just outright toxicity, right? So it's not necessarily for me, it's not necessarily like whiteness per se. It does come from the dominant culture. But I also think about this in terms of saviorism, right? You know, in my other life, I'm a disaster relief volunteer. And the phrase that we talk about now is white saviorism. But there are lots of people who fall into categories of service groups like Rotarians or Kiwanis, you know, who suffer from the saviorism toxicity. And they wouldn't think twice about what demographic they were. Right. So yeah, I mean, there's this definite sense of maybe I think I would call it dominant culture toxicity, you know, for sure. Yeah. But yeah, I absolutely agree with you. It's a thing, definitely. Yeah.
There's ableism in there as well.
There's 100% ableism. Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah. This idea of like, oh, well, if you can't task switch, you know, really quickly, right? Or if you can't multitask, then what kind of life are you living? Right. So I always think of that, is it Lady and the Tramp? Where he says, you haven't chased chickens. Well, then baby, you haven't lived. Do you remember that line? Nobody remembers that line. Anyways, so it's the same thing where it's like, well, if you haven't multitasked and you don't know how to do that, you can't think on your feet, then you haven't lived. Right. And that feels like something that we should all be doing, but it's so great that you called that out. Thank you very much for doing that. I appreciate it. Okay, great. So we're going to take a quick spin through the ground rules that we laid out last time. I know you all watched the video, but because we have some of you here that weren't with me last time, I want to run through this quickly and kind of make sure that we're clear on our understanding of them and make sure that we all agree with them. These are here for our discussion. I know I'm calling them ground rules, bad titling, sorry. But really, they're here for you to ask questions about. I like to assume these or put them into place at the beginning of every session, just so we make sure we're on the same page. Okay. So psychological safety is a concept that was put forward by, oh gosh, a psychologist whose name I can't remember right now. I think it's Amy Cuddy. And the concept is that we can all feel free to be ourselves, cultural understandings and pitfalls notwithstanding, right? So that assumes that we feel safe in an environment without professional or social repercussions, right? In other words, if I say to somebody in this room, I don't know what that concept means, y'all aren't going to look badly on me for it, okay? You should feel free at any given time to say, I don't know, or ask me to clarify. Okay. And that's true of any workplace situation or of any social situation. I always look for psychological safety first. Okay. And actually, Amy, that may be a thing that you think about when you look at your calendar, right? Who do you feel psychologically safe with and why? You know, what does that look like to you? Right. I say that we need to practice, assume, and engage it always because it doesn't come naturally to us. A lot of times when we're in work and social situations, we're not actually presenting our authentic selves. That's nobody's fault. It just is what it is, right? So this is a thing we have to practice. We have to engage it, okay? And I like to say we should assume it always because we like to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? Provided that it doesn't physically hurt us, okay? Diversity isn't just about physical demographic markers, right? We know that diversity can be something like our economic background or the way that we practice religion. It can be about a chronic illness that we have. It can be about neuroatypicality or neurodifferences, right? It can be about anything. Lindsay Greer at the University of Michigan says that diversity is any difference that makes a difference. And I think this speaks to the idea of intersectionality, right? This concept that we are none of us just one part or one aspect of our demographics, okay? Growth mindset, of course, from the lovely Carol Dweck. I always think about piano practice, right? My mother always asked me why I wasn't better at this piece already. Well, because I'm just starting it and I'm 4 years old. That's why. Okay. None of us is born the perfect educator. None of us is born the perfect human being. We are all on this mindset, especially when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion. All right. I may know everything there is to know about being a mid-40s Asian American, comes from Taiwan, living in Southern California. No, I don't. No, I don't. I don't know anything about that, right? Okay, I mean, I know some of it, right? But I can always learn more, right? I actually think I probably know more about being a white woman than I do about being an East Asian woman, right? And I definitely know no jack about what it's like to be a Black American woman living in these United States, okay? So these are all things that we are, you know, working our way towards, right? I'm working on my disability knowledge, but I can always learn from somebody else, okay? And that's true of anything, right? If you ever find yourself beating yourself up for being a terrible artist, right? I mean, we all grew up learning how to draw stick figures, and some of us just stopped there, okay? Not because we're terrible at drawing, but because we decided not to make that a priority, right? Okay, so that's growth mindset. All right, any questions about growth mindset or psychological safety or anything like that? Okay. All right. Bias immunity is not a thing. All right. It is not it doesn't exist, right? You can't say, oh, just because I am a woman, I am free of any racist thoughts or bigoted thoughts. Okay, just because I have melanated skin, I know everything that there is to know about, about what it's like to be economically disadvantaged in these United States, right? Okay, so all of us carry around some of these biases. Our challenge is to make sure that we identify them, right? Look at them, examine them, see where they come from, and go from there. Diversity and inclusivity are hard but good. Okay, it's so obvious, but I think people tend to fall down when something is hard. And that's okay. That's a very human thing to do, but then you have to get back up again. Okay, and we'll get to getting back up again a little bit later on here too. All right. Curiosity and intellectual humility is the thing that I think is not as practiced as it should be. The idea of intellectual humility, that phrase is coined by Angela Duckworth, who does a lot of work on grit, which we'll explore in a little bit. The idea of intellectual humility just says that we don't know what we know what we don't know, right? In other words, we are fully aware that there's a lot that we don't understand about the world around us and the people around us. So I'd like to approach diversity and inclusivity work by way of saying that we should approach it all with respectful curiosity, but also we should approach it with a sense of wonder, right? We should always be wondering, what is it that I don't know about you or about the next person over? What is it that I can find out? How much more can I learn? And when you think about it that way, I think it provides us with a feeling of expanse, this general idea of goodwill that comes from knowing that you can always know more, that you have more capacity for whatever it is that's coming down the pipeline. And that's a really empowering kind of sensitivity, right? Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Questions about that or comments or disagreements? I love disagreements. That's a good thing too. Okay. All right, good. Okay, let's move on. All right, so now I want to hear from you. Either in your professional lives or in your personal lives, how do you talk about inclusivity? How do you bring it up? Does it naturally come up? How do you talk about it? Tell me a little bit about what it's like for you all.
Well, one of the places it comes up for me is that the congregation I'm part of is Chinese, Mandarin speaking and English speaking,
Okay.
both. But I don't feel that we have spaces where we really get to know each other. I think we're going in that direction now. I think we're headed that way more maybe than the congregation was earlier. But there's a lot of room for really getting to know each other and to really at the level of what's really important to us as people. Just so.
Okay.
I see it happening. It's like inclusivity, like you can have a congregation made of two distinct populations, but you have to do work to actually make a community out of it.
So how does the sum of the divide is apparent, right? I mean, there's a group that speaks one language that is not accessible to the other group, right? Does it come up in conversation that people wish they could be closer to one group or another, or how does it work?
I'm relatively new to this congregation, so I don't really know what their conversations have been. So that's like part of what's intriguing to me is like, how did this community come to be? What do people think it means? What are the implications of this for people who are longer term members of the community? I really don't know.
Is it evenly split, or does it weigh one way or the other? Okay.
No.
Okay. It weighs mostly East Asian
English
and then
speaking, mostly.
Oh, English speaking. Okay. Interesting. Okay. In San Marino. Okay. All right, cool. Okay. Good to know. That's useful for me. Thank you. Okay. How about the rest of you? How does it come up? How do we talk about it? Yeah.
So next, Yin Shun, I've lived in Minnesota for just a little shy of 2 years now. And I would say that I'm still kind of in a similar place as where Jane is at, in an exploratory phase, getting to know this community. When I think of inclusivity, I think of and intersectionality, I think of different identities that I'm like, this one, there's still a long ways to go. I've had some people say some pretty awful things to me, and it's like the growth mindset. Some of you are on the path of like your racial awakenings, and I have the privilege of journeying with you, growth mindset. But in other categories of like bridging economic divides and clericalism, like this is a Roman Catholic institution that the Collegeville Institute is embedded within, that Kelly and I work at. And it's just been so incredible, some of the work that they've done. So I've tried I don't always succeed, but I have tried to situate myself in that place of curiosity and humility, of like learning, what did the people of this area do well? How is it that they're actually incredible at bridging the urban-rural divide here in the United States? How is it that here is like an incredible academic institution that's in the heart of like farm country in Minnesota, and actually and there are kind of academic divides, but there's also a lot of bridging going on. So for me, I've been in a posture of learning and saying, you know what, maybe inclusivity isn't exactly what I'm used to, being a West Coast gal from like public schools. It's not what I'm used to. But when I get to know the conversation that's been had here on their terms and in their own history, there's some really incredible divides within the Catholic world that have been torn down here that the rest of the world could learn from, because it's really incredible. So yeah, I think that I find myself doing a lot of code switching and trying to meet people where they're at for those areas where I don't feel like, when I'm talking about inclusion, that they necessarily know how to meet me on certain identities specifically. But in other places, I'm the one that people are code switching to talk to as well. Okay. And so I appreciate that. So
yeah, I think this idea of learning from what your demographic has done historically to bridge those gaps and finding a way to apply those, right, to what you're working on now is an interesting thing. You also bring up the idea of having to code switch. And, you know, the thing is, we don't have to use the words diversity, equity, and inclusivity. We don't have to use those words. You know, we can use words that speak to the community themselves, right? But what I'm hearing from both of you is that the talk of inclusivity really comes up not so much, again, you know, not using these words, right? They don't say, oh, we need to work on inclusivity, right? What happens is it's more like, actually, I feel funny about the way that this congregation is meshing or isn't meshing, right? Or I feel weird about the fact that I think I should be able to connect with this woman, but she's a different skin color than I am, or she has different facial features, so I don't know how to connect, right? So those words may never come up, right? Diversity, equity, inclusivity may never come up. So maybe the challenge is to find a way to speak to these groups, you know, that works for you and for them, so that everybody's on the same page, right? Terminology is a tricky thing. It is an absolute pitfall on lots and lots of words and lots of levels, right? I mean, people hear about buzzwords and they hear about all kinds of things and they worry about it. I mean, look at the way that CRT has been handled across the United States, right? I mean, it can be a really bad situation. So maybe one way to do it is to try and stay away from the terms that could be real buzzkills, as it were, right? Oh, that was a terrible pun. Let me do that again, okay? Okay. All right. Oops. Sorry. Okay. So what I'm thinking about here when I think about starting from the ground up, right, is this idea that sometimes folks tend to think that it is an option for us to be thinking about race, okay, or about what makes us different, okay? It's not an option, right? A person's abilities and disabilities, a person's ethnic ethnic makeup, right? A person's religious background, somebody's neurocapacities. These are not, or their gender, right? They're not up for discussion. Okay, we may want to talk about them as political agendas, or about opinions, or as emotional things, right? They're not. Okay, these are just the way that people are, right? And when you start there, I kind of find that we're in a position to be able to just lay down this one ground rule and say, look, when we talk about this, it is going to be as a fact, right? It's not up for discussion. It just is what it is. And weirdly, even though we for some reason never actually say these things out loud, it can actually set the tone for the entire discussion moving forward. So I would encourage you to go go there and see what happens. With that said, Dr. Stephanie Creary, who works out of Wharton, has a really interesting framework that I'll pass on to you at the end of this course. I'll pass on a resource package that's called the RACE framework. And essentially what it is every word stands, every letter stands for something, right? The first and the beginning ones are the ones that I focus on the most. The R is for relax, okay? And that basically just means just take a chill pill. All right, let's just take all the politics out of the situation. I'm East Asian. I was raised with money. These are facts, all right? And they're going to color the way that I think, all right? The E part of it is continuous education, all right? And that's the part of it that just says, again, you'll be going to be continuously learning about this, but as leaders within your congregations, you will also be asked to provide skills and resources on a regular basis, all right? So you need to arm yourself with these things. Start stepping into those spaces if you're not already in those spaces. You know, really do some education around it. There are great free learnings out there that you can take on board. There's also certificates you can earn, lots and lots of wonderful things you can pick up. But be ready for people to ask you for additional help, okay? But yeah, those two things, you know, this idea of bookending your beginning to talk about race or beginning to talk about people's differences within your congregations can be really powerful. Okay, so yeah, consider where you go from there. Let's see if I can find. Okay, so the other two are to accept the visibility and invisibility of diversity. That's the A. And when we say invisibility and visibility, what we mean is that people's diversities are either going to be invisible to people or visible to them, right? Okay, there is no way in which somebody just exists in half of those phases, okay? Those of us who are ethnic or who are disabled or who have neuroatypicalities, they're always gonna be visible to us, okay? And then to folks who don't have those particular diversities, they're gonna be invisible. It's okay. It's fine for that to happen. It's just that we need to open people's eyes to these two possibilities, right? And that's at the end of the day, it's about compassion and it's about imagination, you know, and making sure that people understand that they have it within themselves to imagine somebody's life in this capacity. But do you know what? Imagination is not just a thing. It's not just like a random sort of nebulous thing, all right? We can actually end up being able to couch these imaginary exercises or this sort of nebulous compassion in concrete stories. And the more that we can share stories about our own experiences with other people, the better off we all are going to be. Okay, and we'll get to the stories in just a second here. The C part of the RACE acronym is to call on others for help. We talked about this a little bit last month, but you know, the idea of making sure that we have people in our networks that we can reach out to. If we don't know what it's like to be a disabled member in our society, if we don't know what it's like to be economically disadvantaged, if we don't know what it's like to be a Muslim in a mostly Roman Catholic environment, find out who those people are, talk to them. And if it feels weird, one thing that I do on a regular basis is I sign up for conferences that are clearly meant for people not like me. All right. I went to a conference on, oh God, what was it? Oh, black hair last year. You know, and it was all about, you know, literature and black hair and how, you know, how Black women see their hair as a creative outlet, you know, and how they express it in literary form. So not bad for me, but you know what? It's okay. It's so nice to be able to go to a conference where I don't have to do anything but learn, soak it up, right? Learn about all these things. And through that conference, I was able to actually gain more connections, right? That I can now lean on, that I can learn from, that I can bask in the company of, right? So yeah, I mean, you know, call on others for help, okay? All right, don't worry about writing down the acronyms. I will sort them out for you later on, okay? Okay, so some other more concrete tools that we can look at are real basic things like, where are your printed materials going, right? I mean, are they available in different languages, right? Are they available in large types so people who are low vision can see them? In terms of your marketing materials and your leadership diversity, like do you have diverse people who are on leadership, who are out in your community, who can go out and spread the word and make sure that folks know that you're an organization that is welcoming to diverse people? You know, are there things like accessible events, right? If we're doing this a Zoom thing, everything should be closed captioned in a way. If you can find an ASL interpreter, that's great, right? Things like your calls for employment and calls for community volunteers, are those things accessible? Are they inclusive? You know, are they available to a wide community? If you don't have, for instance, Black members in your community, are you talking to your local historically Black college or university, right? Things that are available for us that we may not see because they're just not right in front of us, right? I think, Jane, early on, we were talking about bounded awareness, like seeing what you don't see. There's an exercise out there that's called the basketball playing gorilla. Have you guys seen that? It's called the gorilla in the room. Okay, so this is one of those things where it's like, if you're not used to seeing things like Black CEOs or CEOs in wheelchairs, are you likely to overlook them? 100%. 100%. It happens all the time. It's terrible. I can't tell you the number of times I've been in a room with my white husband and people only talk to my white husband. Why? I speak 3 languages. I have a huge mouth and I'm a tall woman. You know, I'm like, I don't, 5'7", 5'8". In heels, I'm huge. You know, so it's like, what? I mean, why are you talking to balding white man over here? I don't, why? You know, it's not here, right? Okay, so, you know, these are things we have to look out for, right? But again, you don't know what you don't know, right? So look out for these things in your calls for community and volunteers, and see what you find out, all right? Of course, this is all going to take a gimlet eye, right? You're going to have to look real hard at your materials, ask people to make sure that that all these things that you're putting out there are inclusive. You're not doing this alone. Okay, you're not doing this alone. All right. Okay, allyship. Talk to me about allyship. When you see that word, what does it mean to you? What do you hear? What do you think it means?
I hear
yeah, go ahead.
refuge or safety.
Refuge or safety. Okay, great, terrific. Jane, Kelly, anything to add to that?
I think of it in terms of real accompaniment over time.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay, Kelly?
Yeah, support.
Support. Okay, good. All right, terrific. Those are really beautiful things, but they're hard to quantify, aren't they? They're hard to quantify. Okay, I have good news for you. Allyship is eminently quantifiable. All right. Somebody out there came up with this great definition. There are 4 conditions to allyship, actually. 4. The first is that it must be active. The second is that it must not be self-defined, i.e. you can't go around and be like, I'm an ally. Okay, like that's, I mean, people do it, right? But somebody else from a marginalized community must recognize you as being an ally, okay? The third is that it needs to be lifelong. Wait, did I do that? Did we do lifelong? Okay, active. Okay, lifelong, right? Okay, it must be lifelong. All right. So again, we're talking about that continuous thread that we walk on. Okay, and the good news is that that means that you always have something to learn, which is great. And the last is that it must be seen as a growth opportunity. It is a growth opportunity. All right. It is not something that's meant to advance you in your career. It's not something that's made to, you know, so that you can say, oh my gosh, I've got so many disabled friends. Yay for me. Okay. It's not about that, right? It's about your own growth. Okay. All right. And also, not for nothing, but I really like the idea of calling it ally work as opposed to allyship. Okay. Allyship assumes that it's like, it's a done thing. It's like friendship. Although maybe it is friend work. I think it's friend to work more than it's anything else. It's marriage to work, right? It isn't just a marriage. So, you know, the thing about ally work is that it reminds us, right, that this is a thing that we're continuously tinkering with. It's a thing we're continuously picking at, right, and examining it and making sure that we're doing right by the communities that need us, right? And this means that it'll change over time, okay? It doesn't mean that we're going to be in the one static space of allyship all the time, all right? With that said, when you're making the case for inclusivity and allyship, this is just a side note, more or less, but there are 3 different ways that you can go about this, right? They are listed here in order of increasing efficiency. The weakest way you can get people to engage in inclusivity work, ally work, is to say, well, it's the right thing to do. Okay, that's great, but by whose moral compass? We don't know. I mean, everybody has different moral compasses, right? Everybody has lots of different things that they're worried about. I think about the 2016 election a lot, for lots of reasons. But, you know, my parents were really upset at the choice because they were worried about whether or not the Democratic Party was going to see Taiwan as an independent state. That's the thing they worry about. Okay. And I can't argue with that. That's the thing they worry about, right? I mean, how can you go to somebody and say, well, that's not a valid thing, okay? Do the right thing. Well, they are doing the right thing by their demographic, right? By their concerns and their worries, right? Okay, so that's the weakest thing you can do the right thing, okay? The second case is the business case. Money is good. Money talks, right? Inclusivity and diversity has been proven to be a very good business case. Teams work better when they are diverse. Teams work more solidly. They work more happily. and they are more productive, and that all that leads to a solid bottom line. Okay, so yeah, I mean, with certain people, your COO, for instance, you can make a good business case, all right, but it's not as powerful as making the case for personal growth. The case for personal growth is by far the strongest, clinically proven, strongest methodology by which you can leverage the idea of allyship or ally work and inclusivity work. Okay, what do we mean by that? Well, we mean, okay, well, you will be a better person if you engage in a little bit of inclusivity, right? You will have more friends from more different walks of life. Your horizons will be broadened if you engage in a little bit of inclusivity work, right? Okay, that's a good thing. Okay, I want to go back for a second to, can I do that? Okay, this question of what allyship means to you personally and what it means to your organization. I'm going to set an exercise for you all. And again, I'll give this to you on paper, but start thinking about it now. Last month, we did an exercise by which we defined our own values, right? And we were able to kind of sit down and examine where our values came from and where where we get our ideas from, right? And I think in some ways, one thing you can really do for your organization is to sit down and define for your own selves, for your own organization, what these terms mean to you. For every organization, it's going to be different. What does inclusivity mean to your organization or your congregation, right? What does diversity mean for your set of parishioners? What does ally work mean for your particular demographic, right? These are things that you can set for yourselves. Again, these things are like, we talk about them as if they're blanket applicable terms. They're not. They're not. It may not be possible for a congregation that is based in New York City to be anything but diverse. Okay, so what does diversity mean for them, right? What does inclusivity mean for them? Their barometers are going to be different. Okay, for a congregation in California, it's going to be super different than it is for a congregation in Minnesota or in North or South Dakota, right? Okay, so be cognizant of that and be fair about it, and maybe set yourselves the exercise of defining internally what it means to you. Okay. The three terms that I've set out are really broad, right? Define inclusivity, define diversity, define ally work for your organization in particular, but you can go hog wild. You know, what other terms are hot button terms that, that you want to explore and examine with your congregation and with your leadership, okay? Make yourselves a glossary, because I think that's a really good exercise, all right? Okay, let's see. Okay, so more questions for you. What kind of hotspots exist within your groups now? I mean, Jane, I know you brought one up now, you know, earlier with the two groups not necessarily melding, right? Are there other hot buttons that exist in your groups right now that you're worried about or that you're particularly thinking about?
I think one thing that I'm just aware of is feeling as though at any moment I could be guilty of a microaggression and wouldn't know it. And
okay. I think that probably is true of all of us. I think for you, the stakes are higher because you don't want to be that white woman, right? I mean, there's yeah, there's that feeling too. Yeah. Okay, I understand that. All right. Okay. Anybody else have any hot buttons or any things that's existing for them right now, either personally or within your group that you're seeing? Okay, that's okay. Yeah, Amy, go ahead.
Sorry, my mouse got lost on one of my screens somewhere. Not so much, it could be a cultured thing as well, but communication expectations of even what people find funny or how much they do or don't internally process. I think it's something that for me, it goes beyond the like surface level of, you know, sometimes people will just say like kind of microaggressive things to me and I'll just be like, you know, we'll try again later. That's okay. But the deeper thing is like, I realize I come from a culture that like externally, a family context that externally processes everything. You know, it's like I come home and my mom's like, tell me everything about your day from what you ate to every side conversation you had. And I want to hear it. And when I expect that from friends from another culture, like in the Midwest, here in Stearns County, it's very like German Catholic stoicism it's a monoculture. And knowing like, well, they're offering me what they can give, but I'm also challenging people and like, yeah, I probably talk a lot more than they're used to. And that's just like, we have different like baselines for how much we do and don't internally and externally process. So we don't even know how to talk about that. And so that's something that I find myself wondering, like, am I too much? Am I too much? And it's not out of dislike or anything toward me, but it is something that's different, and I need to figure out how to meet people where they're at, instead of expecting more than they can give, getting mad at them when they can't give what I want and or need, and playing this weird dance of all of us misunderstanding each other.
Okay. Yeah. So the uppity woman part of me wants to be like, that's not on you, right? I mean, that's on other people. Okay.
Talk a lot, Yin Shun. I want to also give my friends here the benefit of the doubt. I talk a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No, but I think this is the thing, because the question for me is, do you actually talk a lot, or do you talk a lot for their expectations of you? Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've heard people say, boy, you sure talk a lot, or you sure speak good English, or you sure, for an Asian woman. Right. Yeah. Or you sure laugh a lot for an Asian woman. Right. I mean, so
you're very articulate for an Asian woman.
You sure articulate for an Asian woman. Right. Okay. I mean, the other month, I can't remember. Did I do the cruise ship thing, Ellie, when had that already happened when we did the first session here? Okay. So because you all were here, and maybe you've seen the recording, so I don't know if you heard the story about how I was in a buffet line with somebody and they turned around and looked at me and said, I didn't know what kind of accent was going to come out of your mouth. Yeah, that face, Amy. That face.
And can I touch them for you? Go back in time and
They said it with this twang that about like made my ears bleed. It was like, I didn't know what kind of accent was going to come out of your mouth. Okay, all right. None of that withstanding, okay? Because what I'm finding is that despite what we've just said about talking too much, okay, too much for who, right? Okay, what I'm finding is that stories are the best way that we have of actually diffusing a lot of these hotspots, okay? So the more stories you can tell, and Ellie is a huge counter story fan, right? Okay, and we've seen this in both of her books, all of her books so far, right? Okay, this idea of the more stories we can tell that are directly targeted to the situation at hand, okay? The more diverse stories we can bring on hand, the more community members who have these diverse stories to tell, whose stories we can amplify because they've never been on a stage before or never been asked to share their stories, the better off we are, okay? So again, the uppity woman in me is going to be like, you go tell your stories, Amy, to whoever will listen. Okay. But then it also is your job to find out who else in your community isn't having their voices heard. Okay. And make those stories up front and center. All right. And then you have to prep your community, and you have to prep the person who's telling their story, because they are going to get real stupid questions. Like, I didn't know what kind of accent was going to come out of your mouth, or do Taiwanese people eat dogs? Right. Okay. So when you get those questions, your speaker needs to be in a position, or the storyteller needs to be in a position to be able to say, okay, that's okay. No big deal. Meet them where they are, to use a phrase of yours, right? And then just get up from there, right? Okay, so the thing is, if you can find the right person to tell the story, right? And frankly, the right person is just any person who's lived that experience, okay? This is a great thing, right? But you also have to be aware of the fact that no one demographic is a monolith, right? I spoke to somebody who was who's a scholar in deaf literature, and I was asking him one of those really annoying questions, like, oh, so what are some markers of deaf literature, right? Okay, and there was this really long pause, and he said, you know, as many deaf people as there are, that's how many deaf narratives there are. Right? As many East Asians that that's how many East Asian stories there are. Okay. As many white women as there are, that's how many white women stories there are. Right. Okay. So there are all these things that we have to learn about each other. Right. And that's a beautiful thing. It's what is our capacity for hearing stories? Limitless. It's limitless. We are hardwired for stories. Okay. So get your community to tell those stories, and you tell your stories yourself, because that's the way that leaders can make it apparent to everybody within their organization that you value the individual contributions of these people, not just to your congregation, but also to our lives on a regular basis. Okay. All right. So there's a note here about culturally appropriate stories. Jane, you were bringing up earlier that you have this congregation that's split between, you know, East Asians who speak one language and white people who speak English. Okay, English being the dominant language, right? So when we talk about cultural appropriate stories, what we mean is not oh, mollycoddling the demographic so that they're only hearing about things that are palatable to them, okay? But rather they're hearing about things that are specific to them, okay? So for instance, my mom was mugged in our driveway. I'm pointing that way because my parents live there. You have no way of knowing this. So my mom was mugged in our portico of our home a long time ago. And one of the folks who hurt her was Black, and the other guy was white. Okay. But for a long time, she was afraid of Black men for a very, very good reason. Okay. So when I introduce her to my Black friends, right, there is a certain something in me that asks myself, what is the culturally appropriate way to my mom to introduce her to this demographic, right? And also here in Los Angeles, Koreans and African Americans have had this really bad clash that culminated with the Rodney King. Oh my gosh, my head is terrible. I think I have perimenopausal brain, y'all. I should just let you know that right now. So, with the Rodney King riots, right? And so, when I'm introducing Black people to a Korean demographic, I'm also thinking about the cultural appropriateness of that, right? How do we couch that, right? And it's the same way around, right? If I'm speaking to a mostly Black audience, I'm going to work really hard to make sure that my co-facilitator is Black, right? I'm going to make sure that I have somebody on my team who can speak directly to them, okay? So that's what culturally appropriate means, okay? All right, questions about that? Okay, cool. Ellie, were you about to say something? Yeah, go ahead.
Just when you were asking us for definitions of like allyship, it was really interesting because I wanted to respond with stories. So, yes to have coming up with a glossary of like working semantics, like how are these words living in our community, but also using story to break these words open instead of just defining them, I think can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Amy.
Yin Shun, what you said just now actually made me think of something Ellie brought up earlier, which was time, or even like our concept of time. When I think of stories, I think that you're totally right. Like personal stories, getting to break open demographics and realize that not any one demographic is not a monolith, but it does require a certain willingness to meet the storyteller in their own pacing, on their own terms. And I don't know that we always like share that, if you're like, okay, we have 1 hour to get through everything. And then someone's telling this meandering story that it's like, oh, we didn't hit everything on the agenda. And that's really going to hurt some people. But the way to do it is, and so, yeah, I guess it just brings up another invisible bias of like, we all have our most comfortable expectations of how time is spent. The progression of a story of like, okay, you just like repeated the same fourth thing. Like, but for some people, that is exactly like the repetition of it is part of how a story is told, not even just the content itself. And so, yeah, even as you're talking about personal stories being the cure, I'm like, yes, but it's also so hard to get people to all sit and listen to a story and like line up all of those other expectations as well.
It is, yeah. I always remember the day that my dad asked me to write his or edit his biography, right? And I'm like, oh, that sounds great. It's a great great father-daughter project. It'll be fun, right? I don't know very much about my dad's young life, so it might be kind of interesting. So he hands me this sheet of papers, and it starts with 5,000 years ago in China, and I'm like, Dad, what? I mean, that's not okay. So my Western educated brain is like, that's not an autobiography, Dad. That's lesson. I'm like, what's that? But come to find out, and I didn't find this out until like years later, that like that's a key tenet of East Asian storytelling is like, it's like without all this background, there is no me. So I have to tell you about 5,000 years ago in China, even though even though nobody in my demographic has lived, like nobody cares. Like in our Western storytelling, nobody cares, right? So okay, so I have a suggestion for you, which is that when we think of story time, we think of us all gathered around a fire, okay? And like everybody's listening to the one person, all right? Okay, so what if it's just a coffee hour and you just pair each other up, right? Okay, what if it's just getting people used to telling their stories? Because we all know that it's like 75% of the time men speak up more than women. Something egregious like that, right? Okay, so what if we just make a space where people can just talk to each other? That's a kind of storytelling too, right? So let's not think of storytelling as just being like, amphitheater, one person talking to everybody. Let's think about it as lots of touch points for communication. Okay. All right, cool. Thank you for that comment, Amy. That opened up a lot. That was super useful. Okay. So sometimes though, telling stories or hearing stories about what somebody's life is like can open up lots of scary things. Okay. We get the feeling where because we share the demographic that's a dominant demographic, right? Or in my case, because I grew up with money, I get really anxious talking to people who are economically disadvantaged because I don't understand that kind of thing, okay? And that makes me feel guilty. And it sometimes makes me feel shameful, okay? So then I end up in a shame spiral, and that's not useful either, right? Guilt, by the way, is very, very useful, FYI. We want guilt, okay? Because guilt galvanizes us to do things. Amy's laughing because we grew up with guilt in our Taiwanese culture. I don't think our parents did it right, actually. I'm pretty sure our parents did it right. I think they shamed us. But you know, there's this idea where if we can find a way to guard against those, not guard against the bad feelings, because we do want to feel, you know, what it is that we're feeling, right? I mean, a lot of the work that we do within the embodied path is this idea of making sure that we are fully aware of what our bodies are doing, right? So when we are confronted with stories that make us feel bad, there are some things that we can do in order to alleviate that and guard ourselves with resiliency so that we can move forward from the moments where we feel knocked down by a story that has made us feel bad or questionable, right? I'm thinking right now in particular about all the things that are that some demographics have not understood about our American society or about our American history that we are now finding out, right? I didn't know about the Chinese Exclusion Act until 6 years ago. I only just visited my first Japanese internment camp like 6 years ago, right? Okay, so there are parts of this American history that make me feel ick because I don't know how to deal with them, right? One thing we can do is to reaffirm our values. What do I mean by that? If you just take 3 minutes, you know, before you encounter somebody new, okay, or after you encounter a story that makes you feel ick, and you say to yourself, okay, what are my values, right? And then you spend some time writing about your values. That can help you to guard against any ideas of shame spiraling. Okay, because you know who you are, right? You know that you are a curious person who regards people with ultimate respect, and you know that you are really wanting to get to know more about this demographic, right? Or you are a patriot at heart, okay, regardless of the fact that that phrase has been co-opted by things that we don't want to think about. You're a patriot at heart, you love these United States, so you know what? It's gonna be okay for you to learn 1 or 2 things that kind of make you feel knocked off your rocker for a little bit, okay? When you reaffirm your values, or when you know your values, studies have shown that these are actually really good things that, that will help you to move beyond this thing that has knocked you off your rocker for a little bit, okay? What is psychological distance? All right, so psychological distance is a funny thing where like it's called, there's low psychological distance and high psychological distance, or the closer you are to a situation and the farther you are to a situation, okay? When you hear stories about, let's say, flood victims in Malawi, and you're being made to feel bad about the fact that there are flood victims in Malawi, okay? Because Malawians are so different from us, we are more likely to have high psychological distance from us, i.e. we don't know very many people from Malawi, say, okay? We never know what it's like to be in a flood, okay? So when we encounter those stories that have high psychological distance, we're more likely to blame the victim. We're more likely to say, well, if only they had prepared their homes better, if only they had built on higher ground, right? Because they are distant from us, all right? When we have low psychological distance, right? Amy and I are talking, we're talking in a kind of shorthand right now because we know what the cultural background is. So when something bad happens to Amy, I'm more likely to be like, well, it was her mom's fault. I'm more likely to blame somebody else for Amy's problem, right? Okay, so that's just, it's just the thing you need to know. You need to be aware of your low psychological distance and your high psychological distance, okay? You need to be aware of what that effect that's happening on your brain. Again, nobody's fault. It's totally automatic. It's just the thing our brains do, okay? These next couple of points, right? Assuming that you're more context than you think you know, right? There is always more to the story, in other words, okay? Embracing contradictions is just this idea that we can feel 2 contradictory things at the same time. Our brains are capable of that, okay? We can say to ourselves, I both love this person, I hate this person, right? We can say to ourselves, I'm really angry about the fact that our United States did X, Y, Z, A, B, C, umptillion, gazillion things, and I can love my country at the same time. We can do all those things. We are capable of that. We do not have to be monolithic, okay? This last one is a big one. Your perspective is the only thing that matters in a lot of different ways, all right? Where you come from, again, your own values, your own background, right? These are things that you can use to guard yourself against feeling ick in any one situation. Okay? And when I say guard myself, what I really mean is building resiliency, okay? This idea that you are just one person living your very specific life, and you are having this particular reaction to this particular story or this particular person because of a thing that has happened to you in your particular life, that is a thing that will help you to up your resiliency. Just knowing that and remembering it on a regular basis. Okay. I have to remind myself all the time that my parents were huge Reagan fans. Okay. I got to remind myself, my mom thought Ollie North was super handsome. Okay. So this is the thing that I have to remember about myself on a regular basis. All right. And that helps me to remember that I come from a contradictory background, a background that is contrary potentially to what I believe now. And so I can, kind of work with that, right? We can work with that. Okay. All right. Just a couple slides left here, people. Thank you for being patient. Whoops. Aha. Okay. We talked about Angela Duckworth before. Another tool that I like to leverage is the concept of grit. Grit comprises 4 different things. Interest, the idea that something has sparked something in you. Practice, the idea that you are willing to work at something in order to make it part of your life. Purpose, which is the idea that you're doing something for other people, not just for yourself. And hope, which is basically fall down 7 times, get up 8. Okay. The reason I bring this up is because companies and organizations make a lot of mistakes. Okay. And I don't think we leverage the idea of personal grit on the level of the leaders of these organizations as much as we should, okay? Presumably, your organization exists because there was a need and there was an interest in the community, okay? You're willing to work at it every day because you show up to work every single day, right? The organization does not exist just for yourself or just for your comfy office. It exists for your community at large, okay? And then every single time you make a mistake, you got to get back up again. Otherwise, your company will die, okay? So just consider grit. Consider personal grit and how it leverages into the idea of a corporation, okay? All right, this last one is, do you guys know about the Bechdel test? It's this thing that was used in movies, right? So it's like 2 women have to be talking to each other. I don't remember how long the scene is, but in any one scene, 2 women have to be talking to each other verbally about something that is other than a relationship, okay? Then there's something called the Gray test, which is pioneered by Kishona Gray, okay, who's an academic. And her idea is that if she's going to be on a panel or if she's going to be quoted in a paper, the paper has to also include other members of marginalized communities, or the panel has to include other members of marginalized communities, okay? Why isn't there a Collegeville Institute test? Why can't there be a Collegeville Institute test? There can be, right? Why can't there be a San Marino Church test? There can be. Okay, so these are all things that you can leverage. All right. The ego boost test is something that's really interesting. I work in disaster relief part of the time, and we're in this situation always where we're asking ourselves, who is it that's getting the ego boost from this particular activity that we're doing? Okay, if you do something good, are you getting the ego boost, or is it the community that's getting the ego boost? Right, the community that you're ostensibly helping. Okay, so this is a very, very handy test that we can use. Okay. All righty. Okay, we're at the end. Cardinal rule, inclusivity is hard, but good. Diversity is hard, but good, okay? Again, we're in it for the long haul, all right? I fully expect to be talking to you 20 years from now and be like, yep, we're still at it. It's still happening. We're still doing it. We're still making mistakes. We're still falling down. And there are still people we don't know anything about, okay? That's okay. That's okay, all right? We're still in it for the long haul, okay? The question I have for you is, if you are getting it wrong, who in your network can help you to make it better? Who do you know? Who can you lean on? And if you don't know people, you have in your power to go out and find them, because YouTube exists and Zoom exists, okay? And these are beautiful things, all right? Okay. Ellie, I've run over. I have run over. Can I have you guys for 5 more minutes? Is that okay? All right. I want to leave a little bit of room for any burning questions. And I want to encourage you to write to me if the questions are slow burning and they do not catch fire until later. I'm really good at metaphors, friends. I'm so good at them. I drag them out and beat them until they're dead. So feel free to email me. Also, Ellie knows where to find me. But I do want to ask if there are any questions that y'all have for me right now. Okay. Cool. Amy, was that a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I have one. I was like, oh, should I ask it? Should I not? I think something I've run into is interest or teachability. You know, it's like I'm like, oh, how do I name this? Not everyone is interested in how I see or view the world or walk through this world. And when I share, they're like, I didn't care, you know? And it's hard not to when I feel like I'm sharing something vulnerable or that might be for the good of this community or something by speaking up. But I think I have the mistake in staff meetings of being the person where they'll say, okay, what's an area of improvement? You know, like we're opening up an opportunity for staff members to share how they think things could change. And I'll say something and then I'll be like, oh gosh, I overspoke, because literally no one wanted to hear that. And it's a very practical thing that I've encountered a couple of times. Growth area for me. But it's hard working somewhere where it feels like people don't always want to hear what you have to say. And it's kind of the presumption for, I think, some of this work on inclusivity is that people see that having a more diverse workplace is a good thing, but not everyone does. And I always struggle with how much to say or not say in those moments.
Yeah, that tracks on a lot of different levels. Okay, so I had like 50 thoughts. I'm going to try and corral them. The first is that sometimes we read the room wrong, right? When there's a dead silence and people don't react, it's because they're thinking, or because they've been made to feel uncomfortable. I.e., what you've said has made them be like, oh God, that's terrible. I don't want to, you know, that's not a thing I want to touch. Okay. Or because they're not ready. Right. And I think that's where forcing your organization to dial into something like, what do these things mean to us, can be really helpful. Okay. The other thing is that when you are in a situation where you're the only one who's speaking up about this one particular thing, it could just mean that that nobody's had time to actually think about those until it's come out of your mouth, right? And sometimes it takes people a long time to think about this sort of thing. So I would give a little bit more latitude before you say to yourself, oh, I'm the only one who cares about that kind of thing, right? Because somebody else is maybe thinking about it, you just don't know about it, okay? And they're just doing it on their own time over here. Okay, so just let it percolate, right? And then last thing is, this idea of you're feeling like you can say these things means that something is going right. You, in some way, have built a psychologically safe atmosphere in which you can feel free to stand up and say, actually, I know that nobody else has brought this up, but I really need to say something about this. Okay. So that's already a really good place. Okay. If you bring it up again and again and again, somebody's going to eventually have to reply to you. Right. But you also cannot do this work by yourself. Okay. So you need to find somebody, your staff meeting, to talk to you one-on-one about this and be like, hey, I brought this thing up and nobody said anything. Can you help me to understand this a little bit more, right? How do you feel about it? Okay. And then go from there. You know, maybe you've done all these things already. Have you done all these things already? Okay. All right. So think about that, you know, see how that goes, and go from there. But you need an ally, you know, you can't just do this by yourself. Okay. Good. All right. Anybody else? Yeah, Jane.
Well, it's just that what Amy was saying, it just reminded me of like all the times I have had that feeling like you are too much, you are too big, you're taking up too much space. And I think that the way in which people convey that, like I never have seen so clearly how much that's a thing that gets done to other people. And, you know, because I was a woman, an ordained woman fairly early, especially given where my diocese was, like there were very few women. And so I often had that feeling, I'm taking up too much space. My emotions are too big for this space. I'm just too much. And who says?
Yeah, where is that coming from, right? That's what's called cultural smog. You know, it's this idea that women should be this, that, or the other thing, right? East Asian women should be this, that, or the other thing. If you are an underling, you should be quieter than your boss, right? These things that we drink in and that we kind of like suck in through our pores that we just cannot escape, right? Peanut butter goes with jelly. Who says? I mean, that's such a weird thing. When I moved here and I found out people eating peanut butter with jelly, I'm like, why? That's so go together. I mean, you know, peanut butter and I don't know, noodles, I can completely get behind, but like, right. Okay. So, you know, there are these things like pink goes with girls and blue goes with boys, right? I mean, these are the things that we are fighting an uphill battle. It is a Sisyphean battle, but do you know what? It's completely worth it. It's 100% worth it. You know, not just for you, right? But for the people around you who may need to have their eyes open beyond their current capacities. Okay. And that's the last thing I'll say about Amy's comment, right? Is that like, sometimes you do need to be willing to write people off, right? And you do need to be willing to say, okay, I can see it in your eyes. You're not interested in what I have to say. I'm afraid I'm not going to spend much more time with you. Okay. And that's the assimilation factor part of it. That's the part of it that you have to be willing to stand up and say. We're in this sticky situation with our disaster relief agency where we've fully embraced trans rights, and all the things that we're supposed to be embracing, and climate change. And we have had people come to us and say, we're not going to donate to you anymore. And we have had to say, it's okay. It's okay. We're going to do without your millions because other people are going to come in, because we have shown that we are fully embracive of a culture that loves disabled people and that loves trans people and that is embracing climate change. So sorry, but also not sorry. Right? Okay. So yeah, some people you have to do that with, and it's a hard choice, and it's very hard for you to do that without allyship. So ally work, right? Find somebody who will do the work with you. Okay. Okay. Great. Do we have time for Ellie's checkout?
Yeah. Would you mind stop sharing your screen so we could see each other a little bit better?
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. It was great until, and now here we go. Okay. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for the energy you brought to the community and the questions and the presence. This was really, really energizing. And we're just getting started, as the second to last slide reminds us. So I'll invite you to close your eyes, or take a soft gaze one more time. Take a nice full cleansing breath and allow your exhale to bring your awareness to your body. I have a lot of energy in my mind right now. And if that's true for you too, just let that energy sift down into your body, turn toward your body and notice how it's feeling in this particular moment. What kind of energy will you be bringing with you from this shared space into the next part of your day? Notice without judgment. On your inhale, fill your lungs. Exhale really slowly. When you reach the bottom of your exhale, blink your eyes back open. Okay. I'm feeling grateful. Yin Shun, how about you?
Pretty explosively grateful.
Kelly.
Curiosity.
Okay, you can say it again because we couldn't hear it at the beginning.
Oh, sorry. Curiosity.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Amy.
Known.
Jane.
I think I caught Yi Shun's joy from the beginning. Like I was going to say joy, and then I thought, yeah, but that's what she started with. But that's okay. Like I could catch it from someone.
So, I mean, Yi Shun, the joy you bring, it's like, I feel like we've been conditioned to associate this work with drudgery, and that's a mistake, right? We have to make the revolution irresistible. And you do that so well. So thank you so much, folks. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day, and please, please, please stay in touch. Be well.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Jane, Ellie, can I have you stay on for a bit?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. See you.
Have a good day.
Be well.
And Jane, you can stop recording.
Yes, exactly.